Percy planted his feet in a fighting stance. You know, I keep thinking, I have now killed every single thing in Greek mythology. But the list never seems to end. You haven't killed me yet, I noted. Don't tempt me. The three Nosoi shuffled forward. Their cadaverous mouths gaped. Their tongues lolled. Their eyes glistened with a film of yellow mucus. These creatures are not myths, I said. Of course, most things in those old myths are not myths. Except for that story about how I flayed the satyr Marsyas alive. That was a total lie. Percy glanced at me. You did what? Guys. Meg picked up a dead tree branch. Could we talk about that later? The middle plague spirit spoke. Apollo. His voice gurgled like a seal with bronchitis. We have Kuum to, let me stop you right there. I crossed my arms and feigned arrogant indifference. Difficult for me, but I managed. You've come to take your revenge on me, eh? I looked at my demigod friends. You see, Nosoi are the spirits of disease. Once I was born, spreading illnesses became part of my job. I use plague arrows to strike down naughty populations with smallpox, athlete's foot, that sort of thing. Gross, Meg said. Somebody's got to do it. I said. Better a god, regulated by the Council of Olympus and with the proper health permits, than a horde of uncontrolled spirits like these. The spirit on the left gurgled. We're trying to have a moment here. Stop interrupting. We wish to be free, uncontrolled, yes, I know. You'll destroy me. Then you'll spread every known malady across the world. You've been wanting to do that ever since Pandora let you out of that jar. But you can't. I will strike you down. Perhaps you are wondering how I could act so confident and calm. In fact, I was terrified. My 16-year-old mortal instincts were screaming, run. My knees were knocking together, and my right eye had developed a nasty twitch. But the secret to dealing with plague spirits was to keep talking. So as to appear in charge and unafraid. I trusted that this would allow my demigod companions time to come up with a clever plan to save me. I certainly hoped Meg and Percy were working on such a plan. The spirit on the right bared his rotten teeth. What will you strike us down with? Where is your boo-oo? It appears to be missing, I agreed. But is it really? What if it's cleverly hidden under this Led Zeppelin t-shirt, and I am about to whip it out and shoot you all? The Nosoi shuffled nervously. You Ulai, said the one in the middle. Percy cleared his throat. Hey, Apollo. Finally. I thought. I know what you're going to say, I told him. You and Meg have come up with a clever plan to hold off these spirits while I run away to camp. I hate to see you sacrifice yourselves, but that's not what I was going to say. Percy raised his blade. I was going to ask what happens if I just slice and dice these mouth-breathers with celestial bronze. The middle spirit chortled, his yellow eyes gleaming. A sword is such a small weapon. It does not have the poetry of a good epidemic. Stop right there. I said. You can't claim both my plagues and my poetry. You are right, said the spirit. Enough woo-woo words. The three corpses shambled forward. I thrust out my arms, hoping to blast them to dust. Nothing happened. This is insufferable. I complained. How do demigods do it without an auto-win power? Meg jabbed her tree branch into the nearest spirit's chest. The branch stuck. Glittering smoke began swirling down the length of the wood. "Let go," I warned. "Don't let the no-soy touch you." Meg released the branch and scampered away. Meanwhile, Percy Jackson charged into battle. He swung his sword, dodging the spirit's attempts to snare him, but his efforts were futile. Whenever his blade connected with the no-soy, their bodies simply dissolved into glittery mist, then resolidified. A spirit lunged to grab him. From the ground, Meg scooped up a frozen black peach and threw it. With such force it embedded itself in the spirit's forehead, knocking him down. "We gotta run," Meg decided. "Yeah." Percy backtracked toward us. I liked that idea. I knew running would not help. If it were possible to run from disease spirits, the medieval Europeans would have put on their track shoes and escaped the Black Death. And FYI, the Black Death was not my fault. I took 1 century off to lie around the beach in Cabo, and came back and found that the no-soy had gotten loose and a third of the continent was dead. Gods, I was so irritated. But I was too terrified to argue. Meg and Percy sprinted off through the orchard, and I followed. Percy pointed to a line of hills about a mile ahead. "That's the western border of camp. If we can just get there." We passed an irrigation tank on a tractor-trailer. With a casual flick of his hand, Percy caused the side of the tank to rupture. A wall of water crashed into the 3 no-soy behind us. That was good. Meg grinned, skipping along in her new green dress. "We're going to make it." "No," I thought, "we're not." My chest ached. Each breath was a ragged wheeze. I resented that these 2 demigods could carry on a conversation while running for their lives while I, the immortal Apollo, was reduced to gasping like a catfish. "We can't," I gulped. "They'll just..." Before I could finish, 3 glittering pillars of smoke plumed from the ground in front of us. 2 of the no-soy solidified into cadavers, one with a peach for a third eye, the other with a tree branch sticking out of his chest. The third spirit, well, Percy didn't see it in time. He ran straight into the plume of smoke. "Don't breathe," I warned him. Percy's eyes bugged out as if to say, "Seriously?" He fell to his knees, clawing at his throat. As a son of Poseidon, he could probably breathe underwater, but holding one's breath for an indeterminate amount of time was a different matter altogether. Meg picked up another withered peach from the field, but it would offer her little defense against the forces of darkness. I tried to figure out how to help Percy, because I am all about helping, but the branch-impaled no-soys charged at me. I turned and fled, running face first into a tree. I'd like to tell you that was part of my plan, but even I, with all my poetic skill, cannot put a positive spin on it. I found myself flat on my back, spots dancing in my eyes, the cadaverous visage of the plague spirit looming over me. "Which fatal illness shall I use to kill the great Apollo?" the spirit gurgled. "Anthrax. Perhaps Ebuuler." "Hangnails," I suggested, trying to squirm away from my tormentor. "I live in fear of hangnails." "I have the answer," the spirit cried, rudely ignoring me. "Let's try this." He dissolved into smoke and settled over me like a glittering blanket. "Peaches in combat, I am hanging it up now," my brain exploded. I will not say my life passed before my eyes. I wish it had. That would have taken several months, giving me time to figure out an escape plan. Instead, my regrets passed before my eyes. Despite being a gloriously perfect being, I do have a few regrets. I remembered that day at Abbey Road Studios, when my envy led me to set Rancer in the hearts of John and Paul and break up the Beatles. I remembered Achilles falling on the plains of Troy, cut down by an unworthy archer because of my wrath. I saw Hyacinthus, his bronze shoulders and dark ringlets gleaming in the sunlight. Standing on the sideline of the discus field, he gave me a brilliant smile. "Even you can't throw that far," he teased. "Watch me," I said. I threw the discus, then stared in horror as a gust of wind made it veer, inexplicably, toward Hyacinthus's handsome face. And of course I saw her, the other love of my life, her fair skin transforming into bark, her hair sprouting green leaves, her eyes hardening into rivulets of sap. Those memories brought back so much pain, you might think I would welcome the glittering plague mist descending over me. Yet my new mortal self rebelled. I was too young to die. I hadn't even had my first kiss. Yes, my godly catalogue of exes was filled with more beautiful people than a Kardashian party guest list, but none of that seemed real to me. If I'm being totally honest, I have to confess something else: all gods fear death, even when we are not encased in mortal forms. That may seem silly. We are immortal. But as you've seen, immortality can be taken away. In my case, 3 stinking times. Gods know about fading. They know about being forgotten over the centuries. The idea of ceasing to exist altogether terrifies us. In fact, well, Zeus would not like me sharing this information, and if you tell anyone, I will deny I ever said it, but the truth is we gods are a little in awe of you. Mortals. You spend your whole lives knowing you will die. No matter how many friends and relatives you have, your puny existence will quickly be forgotten. How do you cope with it? Why are you not running around constantly screaming and pulling your hair out? Your bravery, I must admit, is quite admirable. Now where was I? Right. I was dying. I rolled around in the mud, holding my breath. I tried to brush off the disease cloud, but it was not as easy as swatting a fly or an uppity mortal. I caught a glimpse of Meg, playing a deadly game of tag with the third Knossos, trying to keep a peach tree between herself and the spirit. She yelled something to me, but her voice seemed tinny and far away. Somewhere to my left, the ground shook. A miniature geyser erupted from the field. Percy crawled toward it desperately. He thrust his face in the water, washing away the smoke. My eyesight began to dim. Percy struggled to his feet. He ripped out the source of the geyser, an irrigation pipe, and turned the water on me. Normally I do not like being doused. Every time I go camping with Artemis, she likes to wake me up with a bucket of ice-cold water. But in this case, I didn't mind. The water disrupted the smoke, allowing me to roll away and gasp for air. Nearby, our 2 gaseous enemies reformed as dripping wet corpses, their yellow eyes glowing with annoyance. Meg yelled again. This time I understood her words. Get down. I found this inconsiderate, since I'd only just gotten up. All around the orchard, the frozen blackened remnants of the harvest were beginning to levitate. Believe me, in 4,000 years I have seen some strange things. I have seen the dreaming face of Uranus etched in stars across the heavens, and the full fury of Typhon as he raged across the earth. I've seen men turn into snakes, ants turn into men, and otherwise rational people dance the Macarioner. But never before had I seen an uprising of frozen fruit. Percy and I hit the ground as peaches shot around the orchard, ricocheting off trees like 8 balls, ripping through the Knossos' cadaverous bodies. If I had been standing up, I would have been killed, but Meg simply stood there, unfazed and unhurt, as frozen dead fruit singed around her. All 3 Knossos collapsed, riddled with holes. Every piece of fruit dropped to the ground. Percy looked up, his eyes red and puffy. What just happened? He sounded congested, which meant he hadn't completely escaped the effects of the plague cloud, but at least he wasn't dead. That was generally a good sign. I don't know, I admitted. Meg, is it safe? She was staring in amazement at the carnage of fruit, mangled corpses, and broken tree limbs. I'm not sure. How'd you do that? Percy snuffled. Meg looked horrified. I didn't. I just knew it would happen. One of the cadavers began to stir. It got up, wobbling on its heavily perforated legs. But you did do it, the spirit growled. You are strong, child. The other two corpses rose. Not strong enough, said the second Nosos. We will finish you now. The third spirit bared his rotten teeth. Your guardian would be so disappointed. Guardian? Perhaps the spirit meant me. When in doubt, I usually assumed the conversation was about me. Meg looked as if she'd been punched in the gut. Her face paled. Her arms trembled. She stamped her foot and yelled, no. More peaches swirled into the air. This time the fruit blurred together in a fructose dust devil, until standing in front of Meg was a creature like a pudgy human toddler wearing only a linen diaper. Protruding from his back were wings made of leafy branches. His babyish face might have been cute, except for the glowing green eyes and pointy fangs. The creature snarled and snapped at the air. Oh, no. Percy shook his head. I hate these things. The three Nosoi also did not look pleased. They edged away from the snarling baby. What is it? Meg asked. I stared at her in disbelief. She had to be the cause of this fruit-based strangeness, but she looked as shocked as we were. Unfortunately, if Meg didn't know how she had summoned this creature, she would not know how to make it go away, and like Percy Jackson, I was no fan of Carper. It's a grain spirit, I said, trying to keep the panic out of my voice. I've never seen a peach Carpos before, but if it's as vicious as other types. I was about to say, we're doomed, but that seemed both obvious and depressing. The peach baby turned toward the Nosoi. For a moment, I feared he would make some hellish alliance, an axis of evil between illnesses and fruits. The middle corpse, the one with the peach in his forehead, inched backward. Do not interfere. He warned the Carpos. We will not allow. The peach baby launched himself at the Nosos and bit his head off. That is not a figure of speech. The Carposer's fanged mouth unhinged, expanding to an unbelievable circumference, then closed around the cadaver's head, and chomped it off in one bite. Oh dear, I hope you weren't eating dinner as you read that. In a matter of seconds, the Nosos had been torn to shreds and devoured. Understandably, the other two Nosoi retreated, but the Carpos crouched and sprang. He landed on the second corpse and proceeded to rip it into plague-flavored cream of wheat. The last spirit dissolved into glittering smoke and tried to fly away, but the peach baby spread his leafy wings and launched himself in pursuit. He opened his mouth and inhaled the sickness, snapping and swallowing until every wisp of smoke was gone. He landed in front of Meg and belched. His green eyes gleamed. He did not appear even slightly sick, which I suppose wasn't surprising, since human diseases don't infect fruit trees. Instead, even after eating 3 whole Nosoi, the little fellow looked hungry. He howled and beat his small chest. Peaches. Slowly, Percy raised his sword. His nose was still red and runny, and his face was puffy. Meg, don't move, he snuffled. I'm gonna, no, she said. Don't hurt him. She put her hand tentatively on the creature's curly head. You saved us, she told the Carpos. Thank you. I started mentally preparing a list of herbal remedies for regenerating severed limbs, but to my surprise, the peach baby did not bite off Meg's hand. Instead, he hugged Meg's leg and glared at us as if daring us to approach. Peaches, he growled. He likes you, Percy noted. Why? I don't know, Meg said. Honestly, I didn't summon him. I was certain Meg had summoned him, intentionally or unintentionally. I also had some ideas now about her godly parentage and some questions about this guardian that the spirits had mentioned. But I decided it would be better to interrogate her when she did not have a snarling carnivorous toddler wrapped around her leg. Well, whatever the case, I said, we owe the Carpos our lives. This brings to mind an expression I coined ages ago, a peach a day keeps the plague spirits away. Percy sneezed. I thought it was apples and doctors. The Carpos hissed. Or peaches, Percy said. Peaches work too. Peaches, agreed the Carpos. Percy wiped his nose. Not criticizing, but why is he grooting? Meg frowned. Grooting? Yeah, like that character in the movie, only saying one thing over and over. I'm afraid I haven't seen that movie, I said. But this Carpos does seem to have a very targeted vocabulary. Maybe Peaches is his name. Meg stroked the Carposer's curly brown hair, which elicited a demonic purring from the creature's throat. That's what I'll call him. Whoa, you are not adopting that. Percy sneezed with such force, another irrigation pipe exploded behind him, sending up a row of tiny geysers. Oh. Sick? You're lucky, I said. Your trick with the water diluted the spirit's power. Instead of getting a deadly illness, you got a head cold. I hate head colds. His green irises looked like they were sinking in a sea of bloodshot. Neither of you got sick. Meg shook her head. I have an excellent constitution, I said. No doubt that's what saved me. And the fact that I hosed this of you, Percy said. Well, yes. Percy stared at me as if waiting for something. After an awkward moment, it occurred to me that if he was a god and I was a worshipper, he might expect gratitude. Thank you, I said. He nodded. No problem. I relaxed a little. If he had demanded a sacrifice, like a white bull or a fatted calf, I'm not sure what I would have done. Can we go now? Meg asked. An excellent idea, I said. Though I'm afraid Percy is in no condition, I can drive you the rest of the way, he said. If we can get my car out from between those trees. He glanced in that direction, and his expression turned even more miserable. Or hates no. A police cruiser was pulling over on the side of the road. I imagined the officers ice tracing the tire ruts in the mud, which led to the plowed-down fence and continued to the blue Toyota Prius wedged between two peach trees. The cruiser's roof lights flashed on. Great, Percy muttered. If they tow the Prius, I'm dead. My mom and Paul need the car. Go talk to the officers, I said. You won't be any use to us anyway in your current state. Yeah, we'll be fine, Meg said. You said the camp is right over those hills. Right, but... Percy scowled, probably trying to think straight through the effects of his cold. Most people enter camp from the east, where Half-Blood Hill is. The western border is wilder hills and woods, all heavily enchanted. If you're not careful, you can get lost. He sneezed again. I'm still not even sure Apollo can get in if he's fully mortal. I'll get in. I tried to exude confidence. I had no alternative. If I was unable to enter Camp Half-Blood, no. I'd already been attacked twice on my first day as a mortal. There was no plan B that would keep me alive. The police car's doors opened. Go, I urged Percy. We'll find our way through the woods. You explain to the police that you're sick and you lost control of the car. They'll go easy on you. Percy laughed. Yeah. Cops love me almost as much as teachers do. He glanced at Meg. You. Sure you're okay with the baby fruit demon? Peaches growled. All good, Meg promised. Go home. Rest. Get lots of fluids. Percy's mouth twitched. You're telling a son of Poseidon to get lots of fluids. Okay, just try to survive until the weekend, will you? I'll come to camp and check on you guys if I can. Be careful and... Kuruu. Muttering unhappily, he touched the cap of his pen to his sword, turning it back into a simple ballpoint. A wise precaution before approaching law enforcement. He trudged down the hill, sneezing and sniffling. Officer, he called. Sorry, I'm up here. Can you tell me where Manhattan is? Meg turned to me. Ready. I was soaking wet and shivering. I was having the worst day in the history of days. I was stuck with a scary girl and an even scarier peach baby. I was by no means ready for anything. But I also desperately wanted to reach camp. I might find some friendly faces there, perhaps even jubilant worshippers who would bring me peeled grapes, Oreos, and other holy offerings. Sure, I said. Let's go. Peaches the Carpos grunted. He gestured for us to follow, then scampered toward the hills. Maybe he knew the way. Maybe he just wanted to lead us to a grisly death. Meg skipped after him, swinging from tree branches and cartwheeling through the mud as the mood took her. You might have thought we'd just finished a nice picnic rather than a battle with plague. Ridden cadavers. I turned my face to the sky. Are you sure, Zeus? It's not too late to tell me this was an elaborate prank and recall me to Olympus. I've learned my lesson. I promise. The grey winter clouds did not respond. With a sigh, I jogged after Meg and her homicidal new minion. A walk through the woods, voices driving me bonkers. I hate spaghetti. I sighed with relief. This should be easy. Granted, I'd said the same thing before I fought Poseidon in hand-to-hand combat, and that had not turned out to be easy. Nevertheless, our path into Camp Half-Blood looked straightforward enough. For starters, I was pleased I could see the camp, since it was normally shielded from mortal eyes. This boded well for me getting in. From where we stood at the top of a hill, the entire valley spread out below us, roughly 3 square miles of woods, meadows, and strawberry fields bordered by Long Island Sound to the north and rolling hills on the other 3 sides. Just below us, a dense forest of evergreens covered the western third of the vale. Beyond that, the buildings of Camp Half-Blood gleamed in the wintry light, the amphitheater, the sword-fighting stadium, the open-air dining pavilion with its white marble columns. A trireme floated in the canoe lake. 20 cabins lined the central green where the communal hearth fire glowed cheerfully. At the edge of the strawberry field stood the big house, a 4-story Victorian painted sky blue with white trim. My friend Sharon would be inside, probably having tea by the fireplace. I would find sanctuary at last. My gaze rose to the far end of the valley. There, on the tallest hill, the Athena Parthenos shone in all its gold and alabaster glory. Once, the massive statue had graced the Parthenon in Greece. Now it presided over Camp Half-Blood, protecting the valley from intruders. Even from here I could feel its power, like the subsonic thrum of a mighty engine. Old Grey Eyes was on the lookout for threats, being her usual vigilant, no fun, all business self. Personally, I would have installed a more interesting statue of myself, for instance. Still, the panorama of Camp Half-Blood was an impressive sight. My mood always improved when I saw the place, a small reminder of the good old days when mortals knew how to build temples and do proper burnt sacrifices. Everything was better in ancient Greece. Well, except for a few small improvements modern humans had made: the internet, chocolate croissants, life expectancy. Meg's mouth hung open. How come I've never heard about this place? Do you need tickets? I chuckled. I always enjoyed the chance to enlighten a clueless mortal. You see, Meg, magical borders camouflage the valley. From the outside, most humans would spy nothing here except boring farmland. If they approached, they would get turned around and find themselves wandering out again. Believe me, I tried to get a pizza delivered to camp once. It was quite annoying. You ordered a pizza. Never mind, I said. As for tickets, it's true the camp doesn't let in just anybody, but you're in luck. I know the management. Peaches growled. He sniffed the ground, then chomped a mouthful of dirt and spit it out. He doesn't like the taste of this place, Meg said. Yes, well. I frowned at the carpos. Perhaps we can find him some potting soil or fertilizer when we arrive. I'll convince the demigods to let him in, but it would be helpful if he doesn't bite their heads off, at least not right away. Peaches muttered something about peaches. Something doesn't feel right. Meg bit her nails. Those woods, Percy said they were wild and enchanted and stuff. I, too, felt as if something was amiss, but I chalked this up to my general dislike of forests. 4 reasons I'd rather not go into. I find them uncomfortable places. Nevertheless, with our goal in sight, my usual optimism was returning. Don't worry, I assured Meg. You're traveling with a god. Ex-god. I wish you wouldn't keep harping on that. Anyway, the campers are very friendly. They'll welcome us with tears of joy. And wait until you see the orientation video. The what? I directed it myself. Now, come along. The woods can't be that bad. The woods were that bad. As soon as we entered their shadows, the trees seemed to crowd us. Trunks closed ranks, blocking old parts and opening new ones. Roots writhed across the forest floor, making an obstacle course of bumps, knots, and loops. It was like trying to walk across a giant bowl of spaghetti. The thought of spaghetti made me hungry. It had only been a few hours since Sally Jackson's 7-layer dip and sandwiches, but my mortal stomach was already clenching and squelching for food. The sounds were quite annoying, especially while walking through dark, scary woods. Even the Carpo's peaches was starting to smell good to me, giving me visions of cobbler and ice cream. As I said earlier, I was generally not a fan of the woods. I tried to convince myself that the trees were not watching me, scowling and whispering among themselves. They were just trees. Even if they had dryad spirits, those dryads couldn't possibly hold me responsible for what had happened. Thousands of years ago on a different continent. Why not? I asked myself. You still hold yourself responsible. I told myself to stuff a sock in it. We hiked 4 hours, much longer than it should have taken to reach the big house. Normally I could navigate by the sun, which shouldn't be a surprise, since I spent millennia driving it across the sky, but under the canopy of trees, the light was diffuse, the shadows confusing. After we passed the same boulder for the 3rd time, I stopped and admitted the obvious. I have no idea where we are. Meg plopped herself down onto a fallen log. In the green light, she looked more like a dryad than ever, though tree spirits do not often wear red sneakers and hand-me-down fleece jackets. Don't you have any wilderness skills? She asked. Reading moss on the sides of trees. Following tracks. That's more my sister's thing, I said. Maybe Peaches can help. Meg turned to her Carpos. Hey, can you find us a way out of the woods? For the past few miles, the Carpos had been muttering nervously, cutting his eyes from side to side. Now he sniffed the air, his nostrils quivering. He tilted his head. His face flushed bright green. He emitted a distressed bark, then dissolved in a swirl of leaves. Meg shot to her feet. Where'd he go? I scanned the woods. I suspected Peaches had done the intelligent thing. He'd sensed danger approaching and abandoned us. I didn't want to suggest that to Meg, though. She'd already become quite fond of the Carpos. Ridiculous, getting attached to a small dangerous creature. Then again, we gods got attached to humans, so I had no room to criticize. Perhaps he went scouting, I suggested. Perhaps we should, Apollo. The voice reverberated in my head, as if someone had installed Bose speakers behind my eyes. It was not the voice of my conscience. My conscience was not female, and it was not that loud. Yet. Something about the woman's tone was eerily familiar. What's wrong? Meg asked. The air turned sickly sweet. The trees loomed over me like trigger hairs of a Venus flytrap. A bead of sweat trickled down the side of my face. We can't stay here, I said. Attend me, mortal. Excuse me. Meg said. Oh, I mean, come on. We ran, stumbling over tree roots, fleeing blindly through a maze of branches and boulders. We reached a clear stream over a bed of gravel. I barely slowed down. I waded in, sinking shin-deep into the ice-cold water. The voice spoke again, "Find me." This time it was so loud, it stabbed through my forehead like a railroad spike. I stumbled, falling to my knees. Hey. Meg gripped my arm. Get up. You didn't hear that. Hear what? The fall of the sun, the voice boomed. The final verse. I collapsed face first into the stream. Apollo. Meg rolled me over, her voice tight with alarm. Come on. I can't carry you. Yet she tried. She dragged me across the river, scolding me and cursing until, with her help, I managed to crawl to shore. I lay on my back, staring wildly at the forest canopy. My soaked clothes were so cold they burned. My body trembled like an open E string on an electric bass. Meg tugged off my wet winter coat. Her own coat was much too small for me, but she draped the warm dry fleece over my shoulders. Keep yourself together, she ordered. Don't go crazy on me. My own laughter sounded brittle. But I heard, the fires will consume me. Make haste. The voice splintered into a chorus of angry whispers. Shadows grew longer and darker. Steam rose from my clothes, smelling like the volcanic fumes of Delphi. Part of me wanted to curl into a ball and die. Part of me wanted to get up and run wildly after the voices, to find their source, but I suspected that if I tried, my sanity would be lost forever. Meg was saying something. She shook my shoulders. She put her face nose to nose with mine so. My own derelict reflection stared back at me from the lenses of her cat-eye glasses. She slapped me, hard, and I managed to decipher her words, get up. Somehow I did. Then I doubled over and retched. I hadn't vomited in centuries. I'd forgotten how unpleasant it was. The next thing I knew, we were staggering along, Meg bearing most of my weight. The voices whispered and argued, tearing off little pieces of my mind and carrying them away into the forest. Soon I wouldn't have much left. There was no point. I might as well wander off into the forest and go insane. The idea struck me as funny. I began to giggle. Meg forced me to keep walking. I couldn't understand her words, but her tone was insistent and stubborn, with just enough anger to outweigh her own terror. In my fractured mental state, I thought the trees were parting for us, grudgingly opening a path straight out of the woods. I saw a bonfire in the distance, and the open meadows of Camp Half-Blood. It occurred to me that Meg was talking to the trees, telling them to get out of the way. The idea was ridiculous, and at the moment it seemed hilarious. Judging from the steam billowing from my clothes, I guessed I was running a fever of about 106. I was laughing hysterically as we stumbled out of the forest, straight toward the campfire where a dozen teenagers sat making s'mores. When they saw us, they rose. In their jeans and winter coats, with assorted weapons at their sides, they were the durest bunch of marshmallow roasters I had ever seen. I grinned. "Oh, hi. I'm Apollo." My eyes rolled up in my head, and I passed out.